Hello again, my friends. It is Ray over at CigarClimatology, and today we're going to talk a little bit about mold and how even the most careful of us can find mold on our cigars. Now, in my case, I have not seen mold on one of my cigars in over 10 years. And a lot of you, or many of you, might be saying, "Oh, Ray, we caught you. You're telling us that your humidors aren't perfect." Well, I've told you a long time ago that my humidors aren't perfect. But one thing I can tell you is that my humidors do not generate mold. In this case, they generated mold because, not out of ignorance, but out of neglect. And largely that's going to be the gist of the purpose of this video. Now, in front of me, I have a nice bundle of Bolivar Belicosos Finos, and these are a cab box TEB September 07. And so you might be asking, well, Ray, how did you get mold on them? The fact of the matter is, it really doesn't matter who built your humidor or how well your humidor works or how poorly your humidor works. If you fail to service your cigars in the role of being a humidor administrator, you're asking for trouble. You're asking for fines from mold or fines from fractured, damaged cigars based on low relative humidity and low percentage moisture content. In front of me here is one of my humidifier assemblies. And this is the one actually out of Generation 10 cooler, which is right over there. And this is the one that went awry for me. And what happened here was very simply a case of neglect. I have a moldy box of cigars based on a case of neglect. As a lot of you know, any refrigerated space will typically separate water from air. That act, of course, is condensation. That condensation must go somewhere. In my humidors, a lot of you also know, I have a deliberative dehumidification cycle programmed and built into my humidors. And this isn't really about that, but you should understand that a sealed surface humidor such as I build will allow ambient water, free water, such as that housed inside of a humidifier or another wet space that might have concealed within it condensation, so free water. Over time, that water will evaporate and end up as a part of the ambient inside your humidor. And that in itself, just the closed space and the free water, will generate a high RH condition inside any one of these sealed surface humidors, mine or anyone else's. So because of that, because of course I'm interested in building a humidor that works, I've learned to control that by programmed humidification cycles. Well, when you have air exchanges and you have humidity such that we've had here, currently it's 80 degrees in here and 55.7 RH. But if I go into my house and the air conditioning is not currently running, inside my house it's probably about 75 degrees, and last time I looked it was about 71 RH. So when we open up the home in the evening and we let a lot of the cool marine air in, that's very, very wet air, and with it is a lot of water, and that drives up the relative humidity, and it will typically stay in that closed space unless we run the air conditioning throughout the day. So in the evening here especially, my shop window is open, it's right over there, and so in the evening, as the temperature drops here in the shop, especially if there's a breeze, an onshore breeze, we will get a marine residual marine moisture, and it of course will infiltrate my shop here as well. So with that happening, and with air exchanges, I was gradually building up excessive water inside one of my humidors. And since this Generation 10 humidor, again, you can't see it, is actually behind a Generation 13 humidor, which is right there, and since I have limited space here, I literally push the one humidor in front of it, since it's on wheels. I push it right in front of it and largely just seal it off, unless, of course, I want to go in there and grab a cigar. Because I'm currently not really testing that humidor anymore. It's an older generation humidor. So I usually peer into it at least once a week, but I will look at the controller, which is based on top of the cooler itself, on top of the humidor, because again, since it was largely an experimental humidor, the controller works as a simulator, like literally all of my external controllers, and it allows me to go ahead and adjust parameters and do things with that humidor without having to open the door and disturb the humidor. Well, because of that, this guy actually filled up with water, and I didn't notice it, okay? So when I took a look at that instrument, I said, wow, it's 65 RH in that humidor, what's going on? And I opened the door and basically water poured out, because it's a solid surface humidor. Since this is now down at the formal base, or the formal bottom of the humidor, it filled and spilled over. And this box, which was on the bottom, took the brunt of it. So this box basically got completely soaked. Not underwater, but up to a water line here. I mean, there was, the seal in the humidor was actually keeping a pool of water in there. And yeah, for a period of time, the bottom of this box was completely submerged. Now, I look at the display on the controls on this humidor every day that I'm in the shop. And while I'm not always in here every day, I typically look at every single humidor in my shop every single day, at least briefly, to look at the settings. But for the period of time that I neglected it was enough to allow this device to overflow and flood my cigars. So let's talk a little bit about mold. Now, as a result of this, it cooked my fan. So basically I have to rebuild this humidification device, which means replace the fan, because the fan's history. The fan attempted to spin sometime while the water was literally up against the bottom of it. It sucked water up into it, shorted the fan out. Adios. But that's another story. So now I have this bundle of cigars, and I've taken some still pictures of it because you might not be able to see them here. But they have some little puffy growths of mold on them now. And some of you, or at least I get email all the time that says, well, what do you do about it? Well, first and foremost, one should note that this humidor was not neglected for a really long period of time. I'm telling you that this was in the water for maybe 48 hours, okay? So 48 hours in the wrong sort of conditions was enough to create mold on these cigars. That's lesson number one. So an improperly working humidor, or a humidor that's been neglected for even sometimes the shortest period of time, can generate mold. It was not the functioning of this humidor that created mold. It was purely an administrator error, my fault, because I neglected to take the knowledge that I have, knowing that it's been very humid here lately, and apply it to looking at every single one of the humidifiers in every single one of my active humidors to make sure that they were not overflowing. And I know for a fact that this one here is relatively full, and that one over there in the Gen 13, I actually probably took 4 ounces of water out of it yesterday because it was also gaining water. But these are front line to me. I literally look into them every day, and that one was kind of put back in the back because it's now, like I said, it's kind of an obsolete humidor. It's just more of an operating humidor to me than it is an experimental piece anymore. So upon first noting this, like the rest of you, I freaked out, okay? No one likes to take, these are now a 10-year-old group of cigars, and these have been wonderful cigars, let me tell you. These have been very, very good cigars, and likes the idea of getting them ruined. So I immediately took the cigars out of the packaging, removed the glassine, and removed the box. And since it's been largely 80 or over 80 inside my shop, I simply set this up on a high shelf, and I have, and I've just allowed the water to evaporate out of the box. And the box, while it's now stained, is as good as new. There's really no residual water left inside this box, so the cigars are actually ready to go back inside the box. The glassine is slightly stained, but I don't see any real negative effect of that, so I'm just going to go ahead and drop that back inside the box as well. And what I did with the cigars was I simply took them out as a bundle, like this, and to be honest, I could have separated them. That might have really been the best idea, just to make sure that there's no sticking of the individual cigars one to another. But they're not. They're not sticking together. And I can tell you that this bottom row here was literally completely soaking wet. These cigars were wet. And as of today, they're just fine. Now, whether or not they are what I consider smokable today is a debatable point. Probably not. I would want these cigars to sit for a considerable period of time now to make sure that water that has been absorbed, not adsorbed, but absorbed into the physical innards of the cigar now has time to completely cook off. So I won't actually even look at these cigars and consider smoking one for another year, just based on the fact that I flooded them. The rest of them are in good shape. There is no real apparent damage done from the fact that they got wet. Remember, tobacco's wet before it's rolled, so if you can catch these things quickly enough, at least I'm convinced, it's not like I have any intention of selling these cigars, but I'm convinced that I will have no issue. By the time I smoke these, I will have completely forgotten about this event, and I'm sure I will not have any negative results or any negative feelings about these cigars based on that. So as usual, thanks again for tuning in. That's what I did with these when I found them wet. Like I said, I've taken these cigars, I removed them from the container, I put them in a normally functioning, this is now the Generation 13 humidor. I simply stood them up in there inside an airstream so that they were constantly being conditioned with the 60 RH air, which is their natural environment, and allowed the excess water that was in them to simply evaporate into the humidor proper, and then allow the dehumidification cycles of the humidor to go ahead and purge that additional water. Now, since it is 80, 85 in here, and I'm having periodic cooling cycles, depending upon the programming of this particular cooler, these cooling cycles might run anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes not in duration, but in period from start to start. They have naturally dehydrated to the point where they're certainly not wet anymore. Going forward, I think what I'm going to do after this video is I'm just going to go ahead and put these cigars right back in that humidor. I'm going to leave them open probably for another week, because what I don't want to do is there might be residual water on the internals of one or more of these cigars that still needs to cook off, and I want to make sure that it is free and in open air and has the ability to completely cook off or gas off inside that humidor without affecting any of the surrounding cigars. Again, it might be a better idea for me to unbundle them. I will probably go through here with a small bristle brush and clean off any of the mold that I see. The mold is just easily removed, most of it here with my fingers, and I'm just not going to worry about it any further. But that is my future, or that is my plan into the future as to how I'm going to continue to condition these cigars, so that once they go back into the box, I don't have any forward worries about whether or not they will generate any new mold based on the box itself or the innards of the cigars themselves being wet. if you didn't know it before, you know it now. Mold is caused by a combination of relative humidity and temperature, or a non-working humidor allowing too much % moisture content into your cigars. Whether your system allows that to happen naturally, whether you, like an idiot, you allow your cigar boxes to get flooded with water, diligence and vigilance is always the key in maintaining your cigar hoard and being an effective humidor administrator. Thanks for watching. You know, I thought a little bit before I completely ended this video about briefly going over how I deal with mold. And of course, again, you might be thinking, well, Ray, if you never have moldy cigars, how do you deal with mold? Why do you bother with it? Well, the fact is that I inspect every tubed cigar and every cigar that I buy typically when it arrives. I cannot be, it's my responsibility ultimately, but it's not my fault, of course, if I get cigars that become moldy in transit. And mold can grow very, very quickly. You know, the vendor that inspects the cigars does not necessarily have to see the mold on the cigars for you to get them moldy. That's something for you to keep in mind. Mold can grow in very, very, very quickly in the right conditions. What I have, this is a common, what we refer to as a chip brush in machining. It's basically a low quality bristle brush. This one happens to be 1 inch. You can typically find these at most of the hardware stores for less than $1, you know, 50 cents typically. And again, they're typically more the length of a standard paintbrush. But in order to make them slightly stiffer, what I do is I trim the bristles so there's just not as great a length to take the flexion that you'll put on it while brushing, which essentially makes the brush a bit stiffer. I pull out any loose bristles, make sure it's clean, I blow it off with a little compressed air, and I trim it into this kind of crescent shape. And since mold spores are really all over the place anyway, it's not really like, well, this brush is now infected and I'm moving mold from cigar to cigar. I mean, this was a closed box and it had the ability to grow mold on it given the right conditions. Again, the free water source or the capillary water, a high enough water activity with a food source which would support the mold. So when I find a spot, I just take it like this one and I get in here with my brush and I just go ahead and I brush them off. And this works really, really well for me. This guy has a little foot damage. It probably started with maybe a weak binder and wrapper in the beginning, but obviously the swelling of the tobacco from hitting it with water is probably what caused the foot of this cigar to split. There's a small little just angel's kiss there, which is not mold. So what I'm going to do is I'll just simply go through these cigars one at a time, making sure that I don't damage the wrappers, seeing anything that has any visual mold spots on it or dustings which look like it might be mold growing, and simply take it off now so that there's even lesser a possibility of the mold going anywhere or spreading. But most of the cigars look like they're in great shape. Oh man, this one's really firm. This looks like it's probably going to be a really good cigar. No mold on it. So there you go. That's how I treat mold on a cigar. I make myself a mold brush. I keep it actually inside of a humidor so I don't lose track of it. And usually when I'm done with it, I blow it off with a little compressed air and just put it back in the humidor. Anyway, guys, again, thanks for stopping by, and thanks for joining me here in the shop for my video. I'll look forward to seeing you next time.